So, today's video is going to be about self-respect in the age of social media. I have no idea what I'm really going to talk about in this video. All of this is going to be extemporaneous and definitely not polished, but it will definitely be from my heart and genuine. And the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think of my relationship with social media is that it has been very hard for me to be honest. In fact, I feel that there's a significant danger in being honest on social media. Furthermore, it's pretty clear since at least, let's say 2020. This was going on before that, but 2020 was kind of like a moment when things came to a head. If you spoke negatively against the basic story that was coming through major media outlets, if you questioned that, if you said anything regarding that might not be the only way of looking at that whole situation, and there were a lot of components to that situation, if you had any sort of viewpoint that wasn't the main storyline that was being fed into everybody's eyes and ears through social media and major media, as they call it, legacy media, dinosaur media, the dying media. Um, you were abused. You were abused on a social level. You were called horrible things, even if and even if maybe you wouldn't say you were called horrible things. You were just called something simple like a conspiracy theory, a conspiracy theorist, right? Oh, why is that so? Oh, that's just so damaging to you, right? Well, you could say that about any derogatory word said to anybody. And yes, we should all have thick enough skin to take any sort of bad word said about us. But there comes a point where we all realize that what we all despise is being called things that aren't truthful. Right? Think about um, nobody likes to be called what they're not. We deal with it and we have to deal with it. But ultimately it is, it's something that we don't prefer, and it's something that's slightly irritating or greatly irritating. But there's something about us as humans that just will not stand for accepting labels from others that don't apply, that don't fit. Sometimes we do it and it does not work well for us. If we take the suggestions that come toward us and we introject those, project those down into ourselves, and then we start calling ourselves what other people are calling us, it's a very dangerous thing. And guess what? It's also dangerous if it works in terms of the positives. If someone's flattering you, if they're filling you up with how amazing and awesome you are, be careful of that. Be careful about those words you long to hear. There are a lot of things we do long to hear. There are things that perhaps have been a bit absent in our particular lives, whatever they may be. Um, and we have to be mindful as we start to receive even the things we so dearly, want, right? Everybody would like a certain amount of respect from other people. Everybody would like a certain amount of status, a certain amount of, attention, a certain amount of praise. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of that. That's part of being a human being. But we've just got to be careful about anything that the outside world is suggesting toward us, good or bad, because we must consider what the intentions of the outside world are. And when it comes to the intentions of major corporations like the ones that run social media, I feel like a large aspect of what is happening is people are being, and this has been going on since way before social media, but people are being asked to accept lower degrees of self-respect, if not being asked to pretty much outright disrespect themselves. To be disrespectful to ourselves means to allow people to, can I say this on YouTube? Oh, can I say it? Can I say BS like, can I say, yeah, I'm going to avoid profanity just for the sake of whatever this may be. But we can't allow ourselves to be BS'd. Like the acceptance of BS into our system and then pretending like, okay, I'll go along with it, that destroys us. That soul rebels against it. And the people that control a lot of the thing, a lot of a lot of the world, a lot of the people that quote unquote control things. That's an interesting word because do people really control us? But there are obviously people that have more influence and power in the world, um, and basically they shove self-hate down our throats. They shove this sense that if we're not part of the program, that we're the problem. When if you've ever gotten into the world of self-development, personal development, and all of that, what you'll end up finding is a lot of people that will say things like, well, where you are in your life right now is a consequence of the actions that you have taken. You've got no one to blame in the world but yourself. And it's absolute nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And it's not and I'm not saying that due to what the next accusation would be that you're not willing to take account for your own actions, that you're not being accountable. You're not holding yourself accountable. Um, the reason that statement is so dangerous is because it contains like an element of partial truth. There's something in there that's like it's always true that part of the reason you're where you are is due to your actions. And there's no denying that, right? So it's like it's a subtle thing. There are certain, and I will not mention their name in this video, but there's one particular political activist group whose name it cannot be argued with. it is a 100% true. But what's hidden beneath that label is pure toxicity. Okay. We've got to get beneath that surface level stuff. And yes, there are obviously where we are in life somewhat due to the choices we've made. But we're also where we are in life somewhat due to a million other things that are completely out of our control. Now, what I'm getting at here is if we start to introject into ourselves all these ideas that it's our fault that we're not happy, healthy, wealthy, and wise. Yeah, it, to me, it's absolutely mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling to suggest to another human being that what's going on in their life has nothing to do with something outside of themselves. Man, it's like suggesting that somehow we control the weather. Yes, we are meant to process and deal with things and realize how powerful we are in that. But when people go looking for self-help and personal development, they're often struggling and they go to people who haven't necessarily solved their own problems. And then we start picking up on the toxicities of the people that we think are helping us. And of course, they do help us somewhat. Again, it's not an either or thing. It's just kind of realizing how things sort of function here. And self-respect is about realizing that we can both trust what's going on in us and also bring in some things that are going to help us while also rejecting a lot of things external and also rejecting some of the nonsense that's bubbling up in us that isn't us, which is a strange thing because a lot of we're always taught to that the answers are within you, and they are in a sense. And yet within us also is the nonsense that has been internalized. That if we quote unquote listen to it, we're basically being subjugated to it. So it's an interesting thing. Intuition. We're taught to honor your intuition. And intuition represents itself through things like feeling, affect, through sensation. We have thoughts, right? This is intuition finds its mode by which to express itself to us. And yet, at the same time, we're often being flooded with thoughts and feelings that are not from our intuition, but are instead from elsewhere. For the sake of me somewhat staying in my lane here, I don't want to get too off into this, but understanding what a psychological complex is really helpful in terms of understanding intuition, emotion, affect. And a lot of people are very attached to their complexes and they think that they are their complexes. They basically identify themselves as these feelings that they have, as these thoughts. But those feelings and thoughts are often, you know, manifestations of something that instead of being as indigenous to the system, they've sort of been Um, it's like the system's been colonized by something external. And then if we're not careful, we don't realize the what's native to us and what's, you know, been colonized. So when it comes to navigating the interior world, we, for me, self-respect means not immediately rejecting nor immediately accepting everything that bubbles up into ego awareness. It means that sometimes the best way to respect all of that information that is being provided to the conscious mind is to be patient, to let things unpack themselves over the course of time. So, in other words, when we have something that we feel or we think, we give it a little time to unfold itself. That typically the very first thing that's kind of popping at us um, might be a little more dramatic, a little more intense, a little bit like you know, exaggerated, so that we get the point to to subtly shift ourselves. If we believe that thing immediately and we just jump to it, we're somewhat we can be being somewhat reactive and reflexive and find ourselves overreacting to a lot of things. So self-respect goes to me along with honor and honoring that within us there are a lot of needs and that there are even competing interests within us, especially in the moment, right? We might really want to eat something. Oh, yeah, I want that. But another part of us says, yeah, but you also don't want to, I don't know, become obese or have diabetes or become inflamed in your body. So, both those things are there. I want it and I don't want it. I want it, I don't want it. That doesn't mean we're of split mind. That doesn't mean any of that. It just means that we have to honor those two things within ourselves. And if there's a part of ourselves that seems to be not too helpful to the whole, um, sometimes it's important to just respect that. Let's call it like um, like a rebellious kind of thing, or maybe it's not rebellious. Maybe it's just like a little less polished, a little less um, articulate. You know, we're not always polished. Sometimes we're a little rough around the edges. And we understand that when we interact with other people, and we understand that about them. Do we understand that about ourselves with ourselves? Do we understand that sometimes some of the feelings and thoughts and things that arise in us, um, that they're a little bit crude, and that in crudeness, just like in the outside world, there's often a message to be heard, and we can sit around and we can just want to get rid of the crudeness of it all. We just want to escape the unpleasantness. Um, but have you ever noticed how a lot of times, not always, you'll find that people that are very articulate, people that are fairly decent at expressing themselves, you'll find them eventually getting to the point in certain situations where instead of even attempting to be articulate, they dip down into crude expression because the articulation doesn't seem to be landing, but the crudeness does. And sometimes maybe our system is saying, look, you're not, you kind of, you'd like for me to tell you in a sweet way, but the system's saying, look, I just got to get you to get the point. And the best thing I have to use right now is negative affect. I'm going to make you feel a little bit bummed out. I'm going to make you feel a little bit anxious. Like, I don't, like something needs to be done. Um, the system, I'd say, hey, you got to have a little bit of guilt here because you you kind of messed up. You kind of didn't um, anticipate things properly. Right? Your sense of um, being able to predict things was a little bit off, and you kind of hurt something, so you feel a little guilt. The system may say, "Look, I've been giving you little hints from the lower back for I don't know a decade, and you don't seem to listen. So now turned up the volume, and you have back pain. It's almost screaming at you." It's interesting how in like religious circles you hear about the spirit being like a whisper. It's not like a loud voice, you know? And sometimes though I wonder if the whisper though, if unheard, does start to scream. Some would say that the scream is the opposite of that quiet voice of God, so to speak, but um there's not necessarily any reason to think that, a whisper that's not heard might not start yelling at you. And likewise, some people might think, well, whisper not listened to might just go into silence and quit trying to even whisper. Um, when I think about self-respect, what is being respected? What self is being respected? What is the self? And for most people, when they think about themselves, who they think they are is their ego story. And ego, by the way, is not bad. You're not trying to get rid of your ego. You're not trying to get rid of your ego. Please don't take that suggestion from people. Your ego is very important. And ego is not a synonym for pride or arrogance. And it's unfortunate that in our language, that is what it's come to. The ego serves as a part of what we are, of our psychic structure. It's helping us to adapt to the world. And to get rid of it would not be a good thing. The deal is, and where the I guess warning is be mindful of your ego thinking that's all that you are. There's so much more than what we are consciously aware of. There's so much information that the body is receiving and processing below conscious awareness. I mean, we are sensing creatures. We're innervated. We got nerves going all through us. We're feeling things. Like right now, until I say it, you're probably not noticing the shirt touching your skin. But as soon as I say it, your focus goes to that, and you're like, oh, yeah, it is. I think it was Tony Robbins that said something along the lines, and sometimes when I do quotes, I'm not getting them exactly right, but along the lines that we don't perceive reality. We perceive what we focus on. We have this reticular activating system in our brains, which basically it's like seeking. It knows it knows how to filter things and help us sort so that we find what it is we're looking for. I've heard it described as this. If you have a tire that's going flat and you're driving into a new town, as you drive through that town, everywhere you're looking, your reticular activating system is looking for repair shop, place to get tire fixed. Whereas if your tire's fine, that you are not looking for that at all. So then when you leave the town, you can either tell the story about um, uh, how hard it was to find a gas station, how hard it was to find a service uh, shop in that town, and how terrible of a place it was, and nothing was open when you needed it, and the prices were so high. And right, the whole story of that place is all about uh, really you and how you came to the table with a need, and you were looking with a particular focus, and what your focus discovered. There's your story. So we got to be careful about when it comes to self-respect. We have to be careful sometimes even about believing our own stories, our own interpretations. And I think what's really challenging is because when it comes to respect, it's like there's two sides of a coin here. And one side says, if you have self-respect, you have confidence in yourself. You um, trust your perceptions. You trust yourself. And if you have self respect, you also have humility and an ability to say, I don't know everything. I could be wrong. There's always more. And guess what? That's okay. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be right all the time. Now, in an age of social media, if you're wrong, if you thought something that wasn't true, you know, how do you feel about yourself? How do you feel about that post you made that was wrong? Are you embarrassed? Do you feel ashamed of yourself? Is that how you should feel? Should you start to second guess yourself more because, oh no, you got it wrong? We're being pumped full of lies and then being shamed for being wrong about some things. When it comes to the political situation, is it so hard to understand why people are misled? Why they think like they do? Is it so hard to realize that we live in a world of many wonderful, great people that are just becoming what they consume, that they're becoming their focus. If they put their eyes and their ears on televisions, and they pull all that stuff into them, and then they start to believe those stories, and they start to take on those points of view, and they start to, hate what the TV hates, love what the TV loves, and all that. It's nobody's fault exactly. It's like it's like these screens are the real toxins. But they're not just toxins. There's wonderful things about screens, wonderful things about technology. There's positives to social media. But the way it's all set up, and the way it's our relationship to it is a humanity. Um, that has got to be perhaps reevaluated, because collectively it seems that there's a push to respect the machines more than the person. It looks like legally where things are going to move is towards like AI, robots, non-human entities having more power and even more rights potentially than a human being. Neil Postman wrote these books. Neil Postman. This book right here, Technopoly. If you've never read that book, it's really worth a read. And one thing he talks about is like different stages of how technology affects culture or affects cultures. And one thing he talks about is in a technopoly, which is different than a technocracy, which is different from maybe like a society that's like tool using. They have technologies. So certain cultures, they have technologies, primitive cultures throughout time, right? They've had technologies, but the entire system didn't shape itself around the technology. Um, as things went from that to technocratic, the technocratic stuff, it starts to take over the society a little bit more. If I'm translating this correctly from his words, I would hate to do him misjustice. Read him. Read Neil Postman. But then we go from the technocratic to the technopoly. And a technopoly means technology has the monopoly on the priorities of what human beings are going to do. The next generation, the technology has determined that a huge percentage of them will be sitting at computers, will be on phones, will be coding, will be doing all things technological. That they will not be farmers, that they will not be hunters and gatherers, that they will not be out in nature, that they will not be walking around as much as, but they will be sitting. That they will not be looking around, but they will be looking at a screen. They'll even put those screens on people's eyeballs. Self-respect in an age of social media means that you're in control, not the technology. And that if it comes between you and the technology, that you choose you. That you choose you. You see how this technology is warping your friends, your family, people you love, people you care about. You see it. Just like you'd see how a drug would slowly start to maybe affect somebody you love. You see what's happening. Maybe you don't have the whole picture, and that's just fine. But you see enough. And if you lived before all of this, and you ask yourself, were people more respectful 30 years ago, 20 years ago? My opinion, my perception is yes. People used to be more respectful. People used to be more civil. People used to be more understanding, more kind. People used to give a little bit more healthy interpretations. They used to be more gracious in their interpretations of things. And as time has gone on, people have become less civil, less respectful, less gracious. In fact, a lot of people look for the least generous way to interpret something, and then they suggest that that's the only way that it could be interpreted. There's no self-respect in hooking ourselves up to the spaceship of technology and thinking it's going to take us to the stars. I don't want to go to the stars. I don't care anything about it. The foreign land that I want to inhabit is the soil of the earth. Since children, a lot of us have been taken away from the soil of the earth, we've been stuck in schools, and we've been force-fed this technology, and then we started having health issues. We started not feeling as well. We start we quit caring about the things that really matter to us. Instead, we just accept an inferior life, a chained to a keyboard, eyes chained to a screen, ears chained to, our headphones. And I use all these things. I love these things. Don't get me wrong. But you know what? I do have to moderate these things. They'll make us eventually sick. You ever sat around and watched too much television? You feel horrible. Or doom scrolling. We are talking about social media in this video. You feel terrible. And we should. That's nature saying, hey, 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 ego, there's a body down here. You need to move it. You need to respect it more than that little, you need to respect it more than your own need to gratify yourself by watching video after video after video. Dopamine hit after dopamine hit after dopamine hit. Sometimes self-respect means not feeling quite as elevated as we would like. It means sitting sometimes on just like a little bit of I don't want to call it a lower energy. It's not a lower energy. It's more of a grounded energy. I think when I was young, I used to think that life was going to be about the peaks. Trying to get to a peak and stay at the peak. But as time has gone on, I'm like, um, as long as things are a little more stable, a little more steady and growing, with a few hills, that's fine. But peaks and valleys, with the peaks come the valleys, and we can't stay at the peak all the time, at least not at the beginning. Maybe there are ways to really elevate through, this is where we get into spiritual practices and things like that. But for most of us, for most of our lives, right, the thing is finding a sense of being able to handle the world and deal with the world and be happy without having to have the peak. Because the world's selling the peak. The world's not selling us generalized contentment. It wants you to buy the peak. You don't just need a reasonable sized home. You need a mansion. You don't just need to be able to afford an airfare if you need to fly somewhere. No, you need your own personal jet. You don't just need to have some clothes to keep you, warm and covered. You need the fanciest designer outfits. It's and there's nothing wrong with wanting some nice things, but the point is we just keep getting sold this idea that I don't know that we can go to that peak and stay there. That if we buy that expensive car, we buy that home, we get that particular mate, and all those things initially give us that elevation that's somehow sustainable. And while we're being sold this and taught this our entire lives and suggested this, we're also suggested that if you're not fitting into this culture and you're not like beaming with excitement and joy and you're not, thriving in this, that it is a personal failure. You just can't cut it. You just can't cut it. You just don't have what it takes to live in the modern world. You're just an old dinosaur that can't adapt. Darwin's ready to chop you off. It's like, give me a break. It saddens me to think about how much shame people have because they can't live up to standards that they think are their own, but have been putting into them since they were little kids. And now they've internalized these things and they can't live up to them and they're ashamed of themselves. And they want to run and hide from the world. And many will want to give up. And many will agree with the suggestion that because they haven't figured out quite yet how to find their contentment in this world, that there's something inherently wrong with them and that maybe nature just doesn't like them and maybe God's even against them and that maybe they should just agree with that and get rid of themselves. Um, we've got to be very careful about ingesting culture. It's not necessarily our friend. And as much as other people care about you, hopefully, many people that care about us will not, they're not going to stop us from marching off the cliff because they're going to see everybody else doing it anyway. So, hey, nothing wrong. You're just following the way society is. Self-respect means a certain amount of self-determination. It means a certain amount of um, non-conformity. And self-respect, by the way, does also entail a certain amount of conformity. We want to fit in and we want to be special, right? We want both. Um, we don't want to give up everything unique about us to just fit in, but we don't want to just express everything so unique about us and so different that nobody else relates. So growing into our uniqueness is very, very important. And maybe one of the best elements of our uniqueness is how we navigate our social relationships and how we dance between fitting in and integrating into this world and how we are in differentiation from it. I read somewhere along the way that as we become more conscious and as we become more of what we really are, that we become both more integrated and more differentiated. And it probably, when we're young, we grew up in a family, a church, or a religious organization, a community, a school, and we pretty much start off on the conformity. We're integrated. And then we get a little bit older and we kind of start rebelling. Like, I don't know about, you know, we start having some, pushback against our family. Some people rebel completely against their families, against the schools, against the churches, against, whatever. So we're trying to differentiate ourselves. I'm different than those people. I came from those people, but I'm different. And then later we go through it and when we reintegrate, we've differentiated, we've kind of found how we might be a little different or a lot different, but then we come back in with a way of bringing ourselves to the table, and then perhaps the system, the organization, the family, whatever, it starts to change a little bit or a lot when it comes to self-respect and social media, knowing how to differentiate ourselves from the cultural momentum to be so technologically everywhere. Um, it's a good thing. And we can do that without just demonizing all the technology and saying that it's just bad. Um, how to integrate in a way that is self-respecting is a challenge. And it's a challenge often in my life. What I've seen is that, first of all, I'll be nervous about posting certain things because I know that there's going to be a lot of people on there that would disagree and that would just be reflexive. They just, I would become another character for them that represents the thing inside they don't like. So you can't even take it personally, but you know that you're going to take a lot of personal hits that you can't take personally just by engaging and being honest. And we got to be willing to do some of that, you know? That said, you also have to respect the part of yourself that might be a little sensitive to it and that might, if somebody says something really horrible about you, you know, and then all of a sudden, and you know that like tons and tons of other eyeballs are on all this, somebody lying about you, who knows? You have to respect the part in yourself that might be bothered by that, that might say, look, I don't, maybe there's a reason why I don't want to subject myself to all that so much. Honoring resistance is important. I hear a lot about overcoming resistance in the world of self-help and self-development, and it is important. Yes. So I nod along. And at the same time, um, we have to understand the other side of the coin. Have to understand that sometimes it's not that way. Sometimes it's the other way. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned how this might not be the most polished thing I ever create, and that it will be from my heart. And I have no script here. The more people are exposed to media and the more people imbibe narratives that continue to reinforce themselves, the less that person kind of has presence in their own lives, and that they just become regurgitating phenomenon or phenomena of something else. Social media and media in general turns people into script speakers. They're narrative parrots, right? People, in other words, people lose their sense of individuality and who they are when they're overexposed to the ideas and thoughts of everybody else. And nowadays, with the technology, we are being overexposed to everything. Even good things that we're exposed to too much can begin to have a negative consequence. The point of diminishing returns. I'm sure you've probably heard of that. I remember hearing that any virtue taken to an extreme becomes a vice. It's really important to consider. Self-respect would mean honoring our virtues, honoring our, I want to be careful about how to say honoring our vices, but maybe honoring why our vices exist and where they come from. And honoring sometimes a vice as though it's not an either or thing in and of itself. In other words, the vice is sometimes not just a vice. Sometimes it has a virtue, but it's just been taken too far. It's been sort of twisted. In fact, a lot of our adaptations in life kind of become vices. And they worked really well, maybe at a certain stage of our life. And then we get to another stage of life, and now they're counterproductive for the most part or for a large part. So in other words, something that was helpful can eventually become a little bit unhelpful. And when it comes to self-respect, I think one of the challenges is when we get a little too focused on good and evil, when we start trying to judge um, certain aspects of ourselves that we don't exactly prefer, but they're there. And most people don't prefer to um, maybe to get a little more angry than most people, when they get angry or something, or they kind of wish that they didn't have to feel that. They kind of wish they didn't get as angry or sad. I wish this didn't bother me as much. I wish I didn't feel quite so this, quite so that. And yet these things happen. And where I was not respecting myself at times would be like, all right, if I was sad or if I was angry, and then I would start, and if I was sad, if I was angry, I'm never that way anymore, ever, ever. Completely got it all figured out, y'all. No, but when I feel those ways, and in the past when I felt those ways, I would just be like, oh, there's something wrong with you. Look at you, sad again. Look at you, mad again. Look at you, disappointed in something again. Look at you, feeling guilty again. Look at you, and it's like, that doesn't help those things. That doesn't help those things. Shaming the very behaviors and the very feeling that, any of it that we prefer not to have, but manifests itself. If we keep relating to it in that way, we very well might make it worse because we're not listening, we're not loving, we're not letting this stuff necessarily unpack itself. Because if we're trying to shame something, we're trying to reject it, we're trying to get rid of it. I'm ashamed of my anger. Yeah, that's probably not going to fix it. I'm ashamed of my sadness. I should not be so sad. Yeah, well, that's probably not going to help you feel happy. Like I think sometimes we think if we make it worse on ourselves, we're making things right. If we can be harsh on ourselves, then we can show how much we care, how noble we are, how holy we are, whatever it is. You ever been in a Christian circle and you start talking about sin, and it's almost like there's a race to see who can proclaim themselves as, oh, you think you're sinful. Let me tell you about how sinful I am. And it's like, okay, like, sure, we all have, and sometimes there's bonding that happens over just being sincere and genuine about the fact that, we screw up a lot. But sometimes it's just like I don't know, it's like a silly, exaggerated way of just being like, shit, I mean, we're human. And I don't think it serves God for us to try to be something else exactly. And do you think at the end of our lives, if we go to the pearly gates, it's like God saying, oh, there's, I don't know. You've lived that whole life and you still have this capacity to sometimes get angry. Oh my goodness. You never figured it out. Oh my goodness, you still have the capacity to sometimes feel sexually aroused. Oh my gosh. You still have the capacity to feel jealousy once in a while or something. Like, come on. Like, how respectful is it to call all of your behaviors toxic or all of your behaviors pathological? And this happens both from like the religious side of things, so to speak, and the non-religious side of things, so to speak. And the last thing I want to talk about in this video is when it comes to social media and shame. This idea of pulling up what somebody posted last year or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, shoving it in their face as though it's present tense and asking them to be ashamed of themselves for it. I think it's going to actually destroy a healthy sense of shame in people because there is such a thing as healthy shame. Um, yeah, if you shame someone too much, they'll kind of become cold and indifferent and maybe not feel shame for things that may, be helpful for them to feel that inside themselves a little bit. In the world of social media, the shameless get the attention. The shameless get a lot of attention, don't they? They get paid a lot. Is that what you want? Is that what you want? Is becoming shameless the same as respecting yourself? Social media, excuse me. If you post something, um, other people see it. And if somebody gets on there and says something really mean spirited, something perhaps personal, and they direct it at you, and everybody else is looking. They're saying, what's he going to do? This is about to get good as they watch with their eyeballs. And then person is asked, well, how do I handle this situation? Because if you fight back in the wrong way, you end up suffering consequences, social consequences, or personal feelings if I don't like how I handled that. Um, and if you don't perhaps speak up for yourself, how you feel about yourself then, which is often self-incrimination. There's one thing that I've noticed. It's that people have a hard time being able to discern about why someone's doing what they're doing. They can't tell the difference between the perpetrator and the victim. And sometimes those things go right together, and then there's a unholy alliance, and both people have part in things. But I think a lot of times people judge reaction formations. They judge if if you're walking down the street and you see somebody yelling at somebody else, you think the person yelling is the one that's wrong. It it's but you didn't see what caused that. You didn't see that. And you know, out of contextness is what social media is. Everything's out of context. Everything is fragmented, and it's causing fragmentation in us. Television did it too. And I'm pointing back here because I'm thinking of Neil Postman. He wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death, How to Watch TV News, good books, really good books. And he talks about television. All right, you watch it, and social media is just like this, even worse. You know, they flip on the news. As it's about to go in, the commercial that leads up to it is like, I don't know, uh, buy some cereal. It's going to be fun. And this is, I don't know, there's some cartoon character selling you cereal. Then the news comes on, and, you know, 30 seconds after you saw this silly thing trying to sell you cereal, you're hearing about people that died in a, tsunami. And then 3 seconds later, as soon as they tell you about that in 30 seconds, then the next 30 seconds, they're telling you about some other thing. And then here's Bob with the weather. And then here's the next commercial. And then here's tragedy. And here's a lighthearted story. And it's like, it's so disrespectful because it gives us no time to process anything. And if you want to make people like neutralized, if you want to make people paralyzed, you flood them. You flood them with things. You shock them. You give them more than they can handle. And they're like left in a stupor. And then when people are in a stupor, then you insert suggestion. You insert things that their subconscious can latch onto or whatever. And this is how narcissistic, horrible people often abuse others, is they overwhelm them and shock them and have them stunned. That's the word I'm looking for, stunned. And when someone is confused, they become passive. I don't know what to do. I don't know. I don't know how to handle it. I don't know what to do. And we live in a world of, I don't know. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know how the world's going to, I don't know. That's probably the thing that is like silently on under the radar with most people. They live in a world of, I don't know. I don't know. And there's a healthy side of I don't know. It's humility. It means there's more we don't know than we do. And it's a wonderful quality to admit when you don't know. But it's a horrible thing to purposely create I don't know in everybody. I don't know what to trust. I don't know if this is true. I don't know if that's a real video. I don't know. I can't discern. I can't discern. It just brings me to my final statement here. There is no real discussion about human health and flourishing and how to build a happy, healthy world or society or any of that without coming to grips with how people must respect themselves above the technology. We cannot conform ourselves completely to the technology. The first introduction I ever had to a computer, I was in second grade, and I was taking an enrichment program during the summer. And I'd heard all about this amazing guy who was a computer genius. He was our age. He was like 8 years old, maybe 2 years older. I don't know, whatever. He's a kid, but he knows everything about computers. Like this guy had like come from outer space or something. This dude was like, whoa. And they filled us up with this. And we go into the room and there it is. This like, Apple old school. This is probably 1986, 85. Old school Apple. And beside it was this frail little kid with an arched back that looked very sick. And I remember as a little kid, my first thought when I saw all that was, I don't like computers. I don't want to be like that. I was right. I was right as a 9-year-old, 8-year-old. I already knew. Look at the world, all the posture issues, all the back pain, everybody sitting in a chair, shoulders pinching in. That's not respectful to your body. There is no self-respect without taking the body into consideration. There's no self-respect without taking the unconscious into consideration. And the unconscious communicates to us about our bodies. It's trying to say, if you're gonna have a relationship with that computer, with that phone, you got to put your body ahead of it. You've got to put other things ahead of this technology. Because otherwise, you will conform to the machine. You will become the machine. The machine will overtake you. And you can see it very clearly in people's bodies. They become the shapes of the technologies they use. And might not look exactly like the technology. Like, have you ever seen somebody that, I don't know, I mean, if your technology was as simple as a little spade, like you're digging holes in the ground, or to dig up potatoes. I saw a picture of a potato farmer once upon a time, and their back was just arched. They almost looked like they were about ready to walk on all fours because they spent their whole life using that technology bent over. And yeah, of course, it's their job, or something to dig up the potatoes, but the point is that technology is part of the job. And our jobs are requiring these technologies, and they're deforming our bodies and acting like it's not happening, or acting like it's crazy for you to say something like that. Even though one day they're going to try to sell you the solution to the problem they caused. Right. And notice this. Nowadays, it's you don't just get on your computer to work or your phone to work. It's not like just a concentrated period of time. And for certain things, it's not just for work. If you want to buy something, nowadays they think, well, get online and look it up yourself. If you got any questions about it, don't ask somebody at the store. Do your own researching. Oh, your computer's screwing up. Well, have you Googled how to fix it yet? Have you not gotten on the website and read through the community notes? And it's like, damn, man. Y'all have, yeah, they'll have us spending every waking second of our lives, every bit of our attention directed into this stuff. People just overlook it. And it's very disrespectful to the children to force their little bodies. It's like sticking them in an invisible little cage, letting them slowly deform, you know? You wonder why people are angry and hurting. Well, the technology, it's so intermittent. When you used to have a phone and you plugged in, corded into the wall, it always worked. Maybe if there was a big big storm, every once in a while you might have an issue with it. But they were corded phones were more consistent than cell phones. The technology, they want to make it smaller and faster, but they don't consider to the same degree the fact that you know what we want? We want consistency. When we hit the button, the link, we want it to load rhythmically. We want it to load. We don't want one screen pop up, the next one pop up, the next one pop up, the next one and then it's like it our rhythms we're designed to sync up. We're hopefully sync up with other people and other good people, healthy people, but we're going to sync up with the machines. We're going to sync up with all the with the flow of the machine itself, but also with the flow of the people that we're coming in contact with, whether it's scrolling through social media or, YouTube, watching videos. But it's hard for a creature to find its own momentum in life and what its natural momentum is if it's constantly being sidetracked into a million ter- well, tributaries, right? Like, I feel like that's what's happening. Human beings, the metaphor would be that human beings are a river and that we're being turned in like the river that we are, which is like it's healthy and it's good. We're being turned into little weak tributaries and divided from ourselves and other people. Um, and respecting ourselves is very much about maintaining our wholeness in a society that is very fragmented and with a lot of people whose interests are benefited if we are fragmented. We're not just fragmented from each other, but we're being fragmented from within ourselves as well. And to bring things back together and to hold one's constituency, um, if we don't do it, somebody else is going to try to uh, pick it apart and break it up. You know, so I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you all for listening. I really do appreciate it. I hope there's something useful in this video, and I hope you respect yourself. I hope if your back hurt at any time during this video that you shut the video off and you got up and you walked and you moved. Take care of yourselves. There are a lot of things betting on the fact that you won't.